Will any ultra-modern cards hold their value long-term? Or will all ultra-modern cards eventually go to zero? Look, I understand this concern because we all remember, or at least we've heard about, the junk wax era. Those 80s cards that were printed to the moon when the sports card hobby was having a boom in popularity. And today, almost all of those cards from the 1980s are worthless or close to it, at least for baseball cards from that era. And today, collectors look around and they see zillions of parallels and inserts and print runs in the hundreds of thousands or more. And they are rightfully concerned that the cards from this era, the ultra-modern era, the last several years, they too may soon be worth nothing. But is this concern valid, or is it a bit overstated? And how can you safely invest in ultra-modern cards to ensure they will hold value in the long term? That's what we are diving into now. The Geoff Wilson Show is brought to you by Arena Club, the official home of slab packs. Now available every day, slab packs offer an exciting way to collect graded cards with confidence. Plus, every pack comes with an instant offer to buy your slab. Don't miss out. Explore the latest slab packs and more by downloading the Arena Club app. Just search Arena Club in your app store and use promo code SCI20 for 20% off your first purchase. Hello, and here we go. Welcome to another episode of The Geoff Wilson Show. Zillions of parallels, inserts upon inserts upon inserts, numbered cards that you would not believe, short prints that aren't actually so short printed anymore. These are all things that it seems like we are currently dealing with in the ultra-modern era of card production. Cards produced over the last 7 or 8 years, it feels like they have been printed to the moon. And if you look at the checklist for any of the new sets coming out, you will be dazzled by the long list of different colors that are available for every single card. There are popular sets like Prism Basketball, which have over 70 different color parallels for some of the cards. Select recently went over 100 parallels in one of its sets. It is mind-numbing. The idea of trying to collect the entire rainbow is now a complete impossibility for most new sets that are released. So now collectors such as myself are now just trying to chase tiny bits of the rainbow. In fact, recently on the Sports Card Investor channel, I did a video where I was showing off my own personal card collection. And in it, I showed some of my Victor Wembanyama cards from 2023 Prism Basketball. And I said, there is no way anybody could collect the entire rainbow of every single Victor Wembanyama parallel from 2023 Prism because there are so many. So I didn't even bother trying. I instead went for the white rainbow, which some people laughed at in the comments, and I understand why, but the white rainbow was the white wave, the white ice, and the white sparkle. Those were the 4 parallels from 2023 Prism Basketball that involved white in the name of the parallel. That may seem a little silly, but that was my way of trying to collect a rainbow of Victor Wembanyama when I knew it would be impossible to actually collect the entire true rainbow of 70 plus different parallels or whatever it happened to be in 2023. So people see this and they instantly go to the comments of most videos that I put out and they say, everything from this era will become worthless. All of these ultra-modern cards are going to zero. Do they have a valid concern? Are they right? Well, I think their concern is valid, but I don't think they are right. And I think there are plenty of cards from this current ultra-modern era which will hold substantial value in the long term. which will increase in value in the long run, but you have to know which cards those are, which cards to buy and to hold on to, and you have to know those that will go up, not those that will go to zero. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, the ones that I think are the ones that are going to hold value in the long term and the ones that I think won't. And look, if you go back through history, I understand why people are critical of today's ultra-modern era of card production, right? If you go back prior to the 1980s, and really even throughout most of the 1980s, but prior to the 1980s, every player only had one rookie card. It was very simple. Players had a singular rookie card. You could go back in time and you could point out any of the all-time greats in any sport prior to the 1980s, and everybody for the most part will agree that, yep, that is that player's rookie card. You have some players like Mickey Mantle that kind of have two really key cards, like his 1951 Bowman, which is his true rookie card, his 1952 Topps, which is his first Topps card, actually more valuable. Jordan's the same way, right? You've got the 1984 Star Jordan, which is some consider to be his true rookie card. And then you have the 1986 Fleer Jordan, which is his first pack-pulled card. So many consider that to be his rookie card. So just a couple of key cards that could be considered to be Jordan's rookie card. The same is true for most athletes prior to the early 1980s. Then starting in baseball in the 1980s, you started to get multiple sets. You started to get Fleer and Donruss to go along with Topps. We got Upper Deck in the late 1980s. So then players began to have, maybe 4 rookie cards, maybe 5 rookie cards. You got into the early 90s, you're getting some additional sets. Now maybe they've got 6 rookie cards, but it's still nothing like today. Today, in every sport, there are 30 or 40 or 50 different sets that will contain a player's rookie card. And then within each of those sets, there are endless parallels, endless variations, endless inserts, tons of different numbered cards. And so you literally are in a situation today where every single player has thousands of rookie cards. Somebody added up 5 years ago, somebody added up how many rookie cards Zion Williamson had. And ironically, the number, if you add up every single set, every single parallel, every single insert, and every single variation in 2019-2020, Zion Williamson had 2,019 different rookie cards. Ironic because his cards are from 2019. That was a total coincidence. But he had 2,019 different rookie cards when you add up all the parallels, variations, inserts, and sets. And you compare that to Jordan, who had 1 or 2, depending on your perspective, right? And that's what kind of scares people today, and I understand it. But it is a bit of a flawed comparison. People who see that, what I just described, and say, okay, so naturally, if there's over 2,000 different Victor Wembanyama rookie cards, for example, even if Victor Wembanyama goes on and has a career similar to Michael Jordan, like an all-time great level career, people will say, well, Victor Wembanyama's cards are never going to be worth that much because there's thousands of different cards of his, each printed tons of times, right? Whereas Michael Jordan has 1 or 2 rookies. That is not a fair comparison, because even if you go back to the junk wax era, even if you think about the era, for example, of baseball cards that today are not worth much at all. You're thinking about, 1987, right? Barry Bonds rookies, Bo Jackson rookies. You're thinking about, 88, 89, Ken Griffey Jr. rookies, obviously the most, prominent rookie from that era. Will Clark rookies back in 1987. You could even go a couple years prior to get to Mark McGwire rookies or Darryl Strawberry rookies or Don Mattingly rookies from 1984. If you think about that whole era of time, a lot of those cards are not worth very much today. But if today's style of producing cards had existed in that era, if there were parallels and variations and inserts and case hits and one of ones, which there weren't at all in that era, if there were, there would be a Ken Griffey Jr. card that would be worth in the millions today. I have no doubt. I have no doubt that the Ken Griffey Jr. first Bowman Superfractor would be one of the most expensive baseball cards of all time. I have no doubt that his Topps Chrome Superfractor rookie card would also be on up there with the most expensive baseball cards of all time. You'd be talking about cards that would be in the millions of dollars today. If Barry Bonds had a Superfractor, what if Barry Bonds had an MLB debut patch? One of one. That would be a $5 million card today. Plus, right? Football. Like, think about like a John Elway rookie, a Dan Marino rookie card, right? From that era. Those cards, if they had a one-of-one NFL debut patch, if they had a Superfractor, even if they had a gold out of 10, a gold out of 50, those would be extremely valuable cards today. The reason why those 80s junk wax cards are not valuable is because there was no differentiation in the cards. It's rumored that Ken Griffey Jr. 1989 Upper Deck card was printed 1 million times. It's rumored that card had a print run of over 1 million. And every single one of those copies was the same in terms of how it was printed. So no, even with that said, that card actually does have a little bit of value today, but that's only because Ken Griffey Jr. is such a name. But I don't think you can look at the junk wax era and can compare it to today. Yes, today there are as many or more cards perhaps being printed than there were back in the junk wax era. The hobby is also a lot bigger today in comparison, but there's a ton of cards being printed today without a doubt. But there's also all of the parallels and the variations in the insert. It's not the same card that's being printed over and over again today in the same way that it was back in the 1980s, with there being no other choice but that card. And if you look back at the 1980s, the only real differentiator we have between those cards that were so overprinted right now is grade. Grade is the only differentiator. And a grade sensitive card, like that 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck card, that iconic card from the 1980s, because that card was actually grade sensitive, it's hard to get a PSA 10 on that card. Now, I think there are, a few thousand, couple thousand PSA 10 population on that card. So it's not super rare, but it may be a little more than that, actually, PSA 10 population. It's definitely not super rare. But it's also not super common when you consider there's over 1 million of those cards printed. For the PSA 10 population to be in the thousands, that's actually a pretty small percentage of the total number of that card that were printed. And today, the PSA 10s of that 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck card are worth a couple $1,000s. They're worth over $2,000. Despite the fact that there were 1 million of that card printed, the PSA 10s, because they are more scarce, are still worth a couple $1,000s. And if you are lucky enough to get a 1010, a card that he later signed, of course, they didn't come out of the pack sign, but if you get a card that he later signed in person and it gets a PSA 10 with an auto 10, that makes it even more rare, and those cards will sell for $10,000 plus. So there actually are some junk wax era cards that can be worth substantial money, but it's rare. And the only reason why is because the differentiator of grade. And what that tells me is that if there were more differentiators back in that era of overprinting, if there were serial numbering, if there were short prints, if there were inserts and variations, there would actually be way more cards from that era that actually would be very valuable today, even though there would be a lot of base cards from that era that would be worth absolutely nothing today. And I think that's probably equivalent to the era we're currently in. I think today there are still a lot of sought after, low numbered or rare short prints, inserts, parallels, variations that I think are worth a lot today, certainly, and are going to continue to be worth a lot. And we'll talk about that. But I also think you've got a lot of base cards that are being printed today repetitively that are not going to be very interesting to most collectors in 10 or 20 or 30 years, and probably are going to be worth very little to nothing, just like the 1980s. Same deal as the 1980s, right? Talking about grade differentiator, what about Derek Jeter's SP foil rookie card from 1993? That is perhaps one of the best examples of how during an era when cards were not naturally scarce, the grade differentiator that we apply to cards today can make them extremely scarce, because that card, the Derek Jeter SP foil rookie in 1993 in a PSA 10, that card is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, even though it comes out of an era where most people consider all of the cards to be worthless because they were so overprinted. So just because production numbers are high today doesn't mean that all of the cards are going to be worthless in 20, 30 years. Because we're seeing some examples from the junk wax era where that's not the case, because there was scarcity applied to grade of certain cards in that era. And today, there's scarcity applied to many, many more things than grade. And don't forget that by the late 1990s, for the first time in the late 1990s, we actually got numbered cards. We got inserts. We got short prints. And look at the value of some of those cards today. I mean, the late 90s inserts and parallels are some of the most valuable, most sought after cards in the entire sports card hobby. Precious Metal Gems, a parallel from 1997. That is a unbelievably sought after card, with many of those cards going into the six figures and beyond, especially if you get like the green, the greens, of which they only made 10 copies of, right? But there are a lot of different parallels and inserts from the late 90s that are fetching today tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars because of their scarcity for the top name players like Jordan and Kobe when they go on the market today. And even as you get into the 2000s, there was actually a lot of production of cards in 2003. Look at LeBron James' rookie card. LeBron James has a lot of different rookie cards. There are a lot of different LeBron James rookie cards. Now, it's not as many as today. Back then, for example, Topps Chrome, the LeBron James Topps Chrome rookie card, there was what? There was no superfractor. There was a gold out of 50. There was an X-fractor out of 220. There was a black out of 500. There was a refractor, and there was a base. Now today there's, 60, 70 different parallels as opposed to essentially 4 parallels and a base card back in 2003. So there was certainly less back then, but there was still a good number of those base cards printed. And there were still a lot of other LeBron James cards that were printed in 2003. But they all have some form of value today, or most of them. There were some LeBron James sets that were printed in 2003 that were particularly heavily printed, like some upper deck sets that were, chasing his cards back through high school and had just kind of a lot of different rookie variation cards in it that are not very valuable today, that those cards aren't worth much. Because they were printed so much and they were so easy to get, and you could buy, and it was like single sets that had like 50 or 100 different LeBron James cards in them. So they were easy to get, and they don't have a ton of value. But then, of course, there are other LeBron James cards from 2003, which are worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. His exquisite cards from 2003, his Topps Chrome numbered cards from 2003, his Bowman Chrome, gold from 2003. There's a number of cards from that 2003 LeBron James era that are extremely valuable today, despite the fact that a lot of cards were made. The ones that are most valuable, when you look back through time, and when you look back to 2003 LeBron James, when you look back to 1980s, 1990s baseball, or other areas of the hobby, this is true really no matter, even if you go back to vintage. There's two factors, really three factors, that make cards valuable over time. And if you think about these factors and how these have played out historically, and then you apply them to today's ultramodern era, I think that's where you start to unlock what is actually still going to be valuable in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So the first factor is the card has to be recognizable. It has to be iconic in a sense. It has to be something that collectors still seek, something that is sought after. In other words, to use an economic term, there has to be demand for the card. Demand. And when I think about what is in demand and what will be in demand down the road, because as I think back in history, what has been in demand, it's always the top sets. It's always the brand name. And if you think about this, like this has always been true, because if you think about, like, for example, Mickey Mantle cards, Mickey Mantle Topps cards and Bowman cards have always been in demand and they have always been valuable. But there are some more oddity Mickey Mantle cards from the 1950s and 60s. You had different cards that were being made by retail stores and hot dog manufacturers and, auto parts suppliers, maybe not in the 50s or 60s auto parts, but like different eras of time. You have these like different brands which come out with their own sets of cards. And that was true also with Mantle cards. There's some offshoot Mantle cards, which are ones that you don't really see every day. They can still have value because they're rare, but they're never going to be as valuable as his Topps cards or his Bowman cards, because those are the iconic, recognizable, sought-after ones that collectors know about, right? As you think about LeBron's cards from 2003, you're thinking Upper Deck Exquisite, iconic. Topps Chrome, Bowman Chrome. Once again, big brands, recognizable, iconic, sought after. Demand. There's demand for those cards. The fact that something is sought after means that it is in demand, and demand controls value of cards over time. Then the other element, of course, is the scarcity of the card itself. Is it a parallel? Is it numbered? Is it a short print insert? How many of this card were made? To put that in an economic term, supply. Is there a short supply of that card? Is the supply low? Guys, think about it. It's basic economics, supply and demand. And I think if you think about those supply and demand principles and you apply them to this era of cards and you think 20 years down the road from now, what is going to be valuable from today's cards, if you think of it in terms of supply and demand, it will start to become clear to you what will probably have value down the road. Now, there's one additional factor in sports cards that makes a massive difference, and that is the popularity of the player. And this is a little bit of a wake-up call to people who are collecting ultramodern. I want to be real clear about something. There's typically only a couple of players per decade, per sport, that retain high value in the long term. Let me say that again. There's typically only a couple of players per decade, per sport, that typically retain a high level of value in the long term. So today, as you're thinking about all of the basketball players, I'm going to use basketball as an example. You apply this to any sport. If you're thinking about the basketball players, let's say from the last 6 or 7 years of rookie cards, and you're thinking about guys like, well, hey, we just had a great NBA Finals between Tyrese Halliburton and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Their rookie cards are in that era. And of course, Anthony Edwards. Everyone loves Anthony Edwards. What about Luka Doncic? Everybody loves Luka Doncic's cards. How about Victor Wembanyama? He's the next great thing, right? And there's a lot of people that believe in Paolo Banchero. There's a lot of people that believe in Cade Cunningham. There's still some people who believe in LaMelo Ball. Amen Thompson is another hot name of a new guy kind of emerging that's been thrown out. And, Trae Young, his stars maybe faded a little bit. Michael Porter Jr., he had a bright star back during his rookie year. That started to fade a little bit. Ja Morant, he's probably fading a little bit. Zion Williamson certainly fading. Zachary Rizachet, your number one draft pick this last season, he's probably not getting a lot of star consideration at this point. But I just named a host of guys who at one point in time, certainly over the last 6 or 7 years, were the hottest or amongst the hottest cards in the entire basketball card market. And yet that whole list of names that I just gave you, only history would suggest that no more than 2, maybe 3 at tops of those names that I just gave you, that those cards will really be sought after and have premium value down the road. And it makes sense. If you think about this and you think back like to 1980s basketball, Michael Jordan stands so far above everybody else. And there's great players from that era. Charles Barkley, I love Charles Barkley, for example. But Charles Barkley's cards aren't that sought after. They aren't worth that much money in comparison. Dominique Wilkins, he was a great player. Isaiah Thomas, Akeem Olajuwon. There were a lot of absolutely incredible players from the Jordan era. A lot of the other Dream Team players whose cards just aren't worth that much in the long term, right? I mean, you've got like Magic and Bird, who aren't as much as Jordan, but still, right on up there, certainly in terms of people seeking them out. And then you got Jordan. And then you got a lot of other guys who were great players from that era. Clyde Drexler, another one, right, who comes to mind. A lot of other incredible players from that era. But their cards just aren't nearly as sought after this many years as Jordan and then Magic and then Larry Bird, right? And you could apply that same comparison to just about any era of football, baseball, basketball, any sport, and any decade. And so as you think about that and you think back to the list of names I just gave you, Halliburton, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, Victor Wembanyama, Paolo Banchero, Cade Cunningham, LaMelo Ball, Trae Young, Amen Thompson, Michael Porter Jr., Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, Zachary Rizachet. I could go on and on. Out of that whole list, you're going to have 2, maybe 3 that are likely going to have much of any value 20 years from now. And when I think about that with like football right now, it's hard to comprehend because in the AFC alone, the American Football League, the American Football Conference alone, you got Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud. I just named 6 of the hottest cards in all of football, not to mention Trevor Lawrence, not to mention 2 of the top rookies who everyone's chasing right now from this last season, Bo Nix and Drake May. That's 9 quarterbacks in the AFC whose cards are amongst the hottest cards in all of football card collecting. And I didn't even mention any of the guys from the NFC, like Jaden Daniels, for example, who obviously would have made that list, or, Jalen Hurts, who now is really hot coming off his Super Bowl win, right? So just in the AFC, you've got 9 quarterbacks who people are chasing and spending a ton of money on their cards. And I will tell you that 20, 30 years from now, other than Patrick Mahomes, probably just one of those 8 other quarterbacks who I just mentioned will have any value or have significant value. That's hard to think about because people love Josh Allen. They love Lamar Jackson. They love Joe Burrow. They love Justin Herbert. They love CJ Stroud. But guess what? There's only so many Super Bowl rings to go around. Some of those guys are never going to make it to the Super Bowl, never going to win the Super Bowl. It's just mathematically impossible. There's no way that Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and CJ Stroud can all get a Super Bowl ring. There's no chance for that to happen. I mean, I guess it theoretically could if they, the next 5 years. But I mean, the chances of that happening are 1 in a million. It is almost certain that 2 or 3 of those guys, maybe even 4, are going to end their careers without a Super Bowl ring. And guess what? If they do, they're not going to be worth much. And even if they get a Super Bowl ring, they still might not be worth that much. There's plenty of guys over the last 20 years that have gotten Super Bowl rings whose cards still aren't worth that much. There's not I got some rare Ben Roethlisberger cards. They don't sell for much. They're just they just don't sell for that much, even though obviously, he's got ring. Even Aaron Rodgers stuff has gone down recently, right? With the way his career has ended. You've got, and then not even to mention guys like Trent Dilfer, who people think didn't even deserve to be there or whatever. So his stuff is worth next to nothing. So having a ring alone isn't enough, but having a ring is somewhat of a mandate, especially in football, to really have your cards be super valuable in the long term. So we know Mahomes is already proven himself and he's going to have value in the long run. But Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Bo Nix, Drake May. There's a lot of guys in there whose cards are not going to be worth very much in 20 or 30 years, unfortunately. So it has to be the right player. It has to be that best of the decade type of player. So that's the first thing. When you're thinking about ultramodern, you're thinking about investing in guys from the last, 6 or 7 years. You got to be picking that player who really is going to be remembered in 20 or 30 years. And then if you can do that, then in terms of which of their cards are going to hold value, it's going to come down to demand and it's going to come down to supply. So my suggestion to you is when you think about the demand equation, think about what cards are still going to be remembered fondly from this era in 20 or 30 years. To me, it's the big sets. To me, it's Prism for football and basketball. Maybe a little bit of Optic, maybe a little bit of Select. Of course, on the high end, it's National Treasures and Flawless. But I would get real simple. I would think Prism. I would think, numbered Prism cards. I would think National Treasures. I would think Flawless. For baseball, I would think Topps Chrome. I would think Bowman Chrome. And then on the high end, maybe something like Dynasty, the patch autos from Dynasty. Maybe a little Transcendent or Diamond Icons or something of that nature. But baseball is a lot about Bowman Chrome and Topps Chrome. And then in terms of the actual type of card from those sets, I would be thinking about case hits, your Kabooms, your Downtowns, your Color Blast. Now, your Downtowns do come from a different set. They come from Donruss. I wouldn't touch anything else from Donruss in the long term, but maybe the Downtowns. Or now that the Downtowns are becoming a bit watered down, maybe the number Downtowns. From your top sets, it's your super short prints. It's your numbered parallels. Their Topps is trying to bring more inserts into the fold, or I shouldn't say inserts, but more variations. Yeah, more inserts as well. They're trying to introduce more inserts and have them be valuable, more variations. Of course, they have the MLB debut patches. That was a big win for Topps. I like the radiating rookies. I like some of the things they're trying to do, but we'll see how some of that stuff holds up in the long run. We don't know right now. When you're thinking about the numbered variations, the parallels, the different refractors, I think you need to think about iconic colors because there are 70 different color parallels now in some of these sets. So even if you have a Prism colored parallel of a top player, let's say Victor Wembanyama does go on to become a Hall of Famer and wins, 5 rings, his stuff will be valuable then 20 or 30 years from now. But not every single one of his Prism color parallels will probably be that sought after because there's so many. So I would look at the colors that either are most iconic, which are the ones that have existed for years, right? Not the new ones they've added in, the true colors. So not the Ray Waves or the Ices or, but the true plain colors. And then the iconic colors, the ones that have existed in sets for years, like for top, or really, for both Prism and Topps products, certainly the gold. For Prism, gold out of 10, for Topps, gold out of 50. That would be very, very high on my list, probably top on my list of parallels to look at. For Topps, you've got the reds, typically the red out of 5. That would absolutely, those are going to be very expensive, but absolutely goes into that list. Orange out of 25. For Prism, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I invested in the Wemby White Rainbow. I got the Wemby Prism White, the White Ice, the White Sparkle, and the White Wave. And the reason why I got the white parallels of Wemby is because I felt visually they had the most eye appeal. I felt the white parallels looked best with the Spurs jersey and the black card design with the black curtain behind Wemby. So I went for eye appeal. And I said, which of these parallels is going to look best to collectors 30 years from now? I think it's the whites. They look beautiful. I don't think it's a pink or a blue or a red that don't match Wemby's jersey or the picture at all. It's just a random color that doesn't match anything. I think it's the whites. I think the whites have the eye appeal. You could argue the blacks as well, but the blacks are the one-on-ones. So, of course, the blacks, because they're the one-on-ones. But if you're not going to buy the one-on-one for $500,000, then the whites, in my opinion, are the ones that have the eye appeal. And so that's why I went for that. But I think, whichever route you want to go, if you want to go the route of case hits and short prints, if you want to go the route of parallels and trying to find the parallels that you think are going to hold up best, it's really about finding those cards that are going to be in demand down the road that there's not going to be a lot of supply of down the road. So once again, the biggest sets, the sets that people are going to remember. People are going to remember Prism. They're going to remember National Treasures. They're going to remember Flawless. They're going to remember Topps Chrome. They're going to remember Bowman Chrome. They're going to remember Dynasty. They're probably not going to remember Phoenix or XR or Topps Fire, or I don't know, maybe even Topps Cosmic Chrome, even though some people love that. Those types of things that I feel are like maybe a little more gimmicky and they're not as name brand. Those are the types of sets that I would be a little more worried about having a lot of value down the road. But if you've got a big parallel from Topps Chrome, I feel good about that for you. I feel good about that thing having value because people are going to remember it. And if it's a parallel that's one of the iconic gemstone color parallels, I feel pretty good that assuming that player is one of those generational once in a decade, twice in a decade players that you have that card of, I feel like you got something that's going to be worth a lot. And you don't have to worry about the fact that it's coming out of the ultra-modern era. And yes, there are a million cards printed today. There absolutely are. But you got to separate the noise and you got to think about supply and demand and what is in relatively short supply today that will be in high demand still 20, 30, 40 years from now. And that is when you're going to find those cards that, in my opinion, are going to continue to hold and maintain and grow in value from the ultramodern era, from an era where a lot of base cards probably will become worth next to nothing 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road from today. All right, what do you guys think? What other tips do you might have? How are you collecting the ultramodern era? Please let me know in the comments. And don't forget, the full-length episodes of these Geoff Wilson shows are available on YouTube under the Geoff Wilson Show channel on YouTube. They're also available on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. So make sure to subscribe everywhere so you can listen to this show on the go. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon with the next one. Take care.